November 121 Mike, your turn. Taxiing 111.
Hi, and welcome to 121 Point Mike Ground School. I'm still Mike Thompson, and this video is the one that I promised you in the last one. This one covers how to handle crosswinds. The previous video talked about how to find your crosswind component with the charts and the electronic E6B. You might use that information to decide if you're going to go fly or not that day. What amount of crosswind, though, are you comfortable with? Or what can your plane handle? It's likely that the plane can handle more crosswind than you're experienced or comfortable with. But of course it depends on the plane too. But let's say that the wind is within limits and that you've decided to fly. Great! Remember the crosswind controls during startup and taxi. Remember to keep your ailerons fully deflected at the start of the takeoff roll and then transition to level ailerons as you lift off to avoid striking a wingtip on the ground. Now, you could tilt the plane into the wind and climb in a slip, but you really want all your lift pointing straight up, so it's better to crab. Wait a minute, what the heck's a slip and a crab? I covered those in other videos, but let's discuss it here really quick. A slip happens when the plane is tilted and sliding toward the low wing. I covered slips in the turn indicators video, so check that out if you need to. A crab happens when the ground track of the plane is different from where the nose is pointing. But watch out, because they can pinch. Crabbing is like what you do in a boat, right when you need to cross a stream. You can't point right at the dock because you'll drift downstream. So you aim upstream, or upwind in this case, so that your track straight across the ground, right? In flight planning, you'll calculate your headings on each leg to compensate for crosswinds, but it's easy to do near the ground on takeoff because, well, you've got this nice dashed line right along the ground to follow, which is excellent. The idea, of course, is to just stay above the runway center line, and so you use the rudder on takeoff to do that, with wings level so that you can get maximum lift pointed straight up. You'll need right rudder in a climb on most propeller planes because of P factor. Once you're in cruise, though, you can ease off the rudder, but you'll still need a little bit of a crab angle to maintain the desired ground track. Now, GPS will gladly tell you what your ground track is, so you can adjust your degree 1 or 2 left or right of your course, to stay on track and follow that magenta line. Your instructor will likely have you fly rectangular tracks across the ground to learn about dealing with crosswinds. You'll try to fly along a road and then use different crab angles on each leg to compensate for the wind so that you can track straight on each segment. This skill, of course, is important because we ultimately want to fly nice rectangular traffic patterns at the airport and not be cutting across other traffic or midfield or having to do a split S to get from downwind to final. Good approaches make for good landings. You hear that all the time, and now once more. You need a sufficiently long final approach, though, so that you can work out your approach angle and your ground track. You have a decision to make here, though, unlike with takeoff. You can choose to crab it in, or you can slip it in. We don't want maximum lift here because we actually want to come down, so a slip is okay. Crabs work here the same as on takeoff, but you need less right rudder on the way down because less P factor. Pick an angle off the center line that keeps your track straight along the center line. Of course, make 1 to 2 degree small adjustments to stay on that center line. An easy tip, though, to see if you're on center line or drifting right or left, is to look at the far end of the runway and then see if the center line and approach end are drifting right or left in relation to that, right? You want that center line to hang vertically in your windscreen without moving. Now you might decide to slip it in. In this case, the nose of your plane is aligned with the runway, but you're rolled slightly into the wind so that you slip sideways at the same rate that the wind is pushing you. Now this requires opposite rudder, intentional uncoordinated flight. I know. I did say that I'd get to intentional slips eventually, and here it is. There's another kind I'll get to later. But the benefit of slipping is mainly that you can keep the runway and the airplane already aligned, right? You'll see on your tests that airplane's longitudinal axis should be aligned with the runway at the moment of touchdown. If it's not, you impose lots of side load on the landing gear, and you risk embarrassing yourself if you're in a tailwheel airplane. Another benefit of slipping it in, of course, is that it's more comfortable for the passengers. Some don't seem to like flying at odd angles near the ground. Airliners I've flown on seem to slip it in for this reason. When you land in a slip, your upwind main wheel is going to touch down first, obviously, and that's okay. Just be gentle as you bring the other one down and then the nose. Right. You're still on centerline, right? As long as you're not over the solid white line, you're fine. But try to get to the center, because you have the greatest margin for error there. If you decide to crab it in, you'll have to apply some rudder right before touchdown in the flare to align the plane with the runway. Now, I've landed slightly crabbed many times, and it's always been fine, but I'm always shooting for straight, of course, and the wind is never constant anyway. But now let me mention really quick why landing in a crab in a taildragger is such a bad idea. The ground loop. A taildragger's center of gravity is behind the main wheels, right? That's why it drags its tail. And this is a very unstable configuration. Have you ever tried to steer a loaded shopping cart backwards? It's really hard, isn't it? You need the CG ahead of the center of pressure, which are the wheels in this case when you're on the ground. The CG in a taildragger wants to be ahead of the wheels, and it's going to work against you to get there. You must really be on the rudder and aligned when you land, because if you plant those mains and the plane is moving sideways at all, you'll have a torque created between the wheels and the aft CG, and torques like to twist things. You'll quickly end up back-asswards, and those pedals in a taildragger are really important. This is why we use a car's front wheels to change our direction, not the back ones. It's more stable and therefore safer. And that's why tricycle gear has mostly replaced conventional gear. It's easier and safer for most types of flying. When you crosswind, and you nearly always do, crab on the way up, but you may slip on the way down. So be careful, especially when it's icy. Crab and cruise. You've probably heard of crab and cruisers. And it's okay to have crabs, but not in a taildragger. But go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. That'll certainly help me out, as we're leaving a bunch of comments and engaging in lively discussions down below. Maybe check out one of those shirts. And thanks for staying with me on 121 Point Mike.